call the meeting to order. And before we begin the agenda, would the town manager please read the disclaimer?
Yes. Just a reminder to everyone that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the town's website for review later if need be. We ask that people speak one at a time. Use the raise hand function if you would like to make a comment for the council meeting portion of this meeting. And if for some reason we are interrupted, we will end the meeting and send out instructions on how to rejoin the meeting. Anybody whose name does not appear, I'll send a message and ask that you identify yourself. And if you do make any comments, please state your name and street for the record. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Town Manager. The first item is to consider approval of the minutes from the special council meeting held on February 8th, 2021. Is there a motion?
The minutes with an amendment?
Well, can you say the amendment? Say,
Yes, in the item under 501, the last paragraph, it says all in order. I'm not sure everybody would understand that that's all in favor.
Thank you.
okay, thank you. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? I see Zoighauser. Thank you. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you. Next item is to consider adoption of ordinance number 121, a declaration of a state of emergency and ordinance to activate an emergency plan for the town election. Mr. Town Manager, and I believe Mr. Town Attorney will be presenting this.
Yeah, this was introduced at the March meeting and basically just uses our authority to declare a state of emergency to adopt special emergency plans for this upcoming election. And the plans are included for you and were reviewed as well at the March meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Town Attorney, do you want to add anything?
No, Mr. Mayor. Other than it has been reviewed by Electech as well. And it's basically the same approach as last year.
Okay, thank you. Council President Shaw, do you have any questions? We can't, I saw your lips, but we couldn't hear you, so thank you. Council Member.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Zoighauser, do you have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Peel.
No questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Circo.
I just have one question. If the election is unopposed, if we happen to end up with just 3 new volunteers who are applying for the 3 openings that are coming up, do we have to have this election, or we do still because they're new people, or what's the
I'll let
scoop?
Matt answer that.
These emergency plans actually contain a contingency for that possibility and would mean that the people who are running unopposed are seated automatically without having to pay the money to Electech, essentially.
Super, thank you. I have no idea where we'll stand up. I just
Well, and Matt didn't give himself enough credit there. Matt also negotiated with Electech that there'd be no charge for the work to date if we cancel the election
Wow,
prior, if it's uncontested.
that is a lot of, that is something. worth
Okay, thank
celebrating.
you. Councilor Barr, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Town Manager, has any resident or guest raised their hand?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Council, are you prepared to make a motion? Madam President.
I move that we adopt the emergency plans for town election 2021.
Second,
That I heard Peel. Was that enough in the motion, Mr. Town Attorney? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
I,
All those opposed? Thank you. The next item is to consider approval of a Somerset Council signature on the Thrive Montgomery 2050 community letter drafted by the Down County Coalition. Madam President, I believe you're presenting this.
Yes. For those of you who've been following along, you know that it's been kind of a messy process with Thrive 2050 with a public hearing last November. And since then, the planning board has taken the comments that it received both in writing and at the hearing and has been rewriting Thrive Montgomery 2050 with the idea that it would convey this to the county council for its consideration in April of this year. It's a very complicated document. Some would argue that it has been pretty much totally rewritten. The planning board's position is that it is kind of fine-tuned the draft, but it's essentially the same kind of draft and therefore is not subject to further public hearing process. And basically what this letter is asking for is a slowdown of this process so that it has nothing to do with positions on any of the issues within Thrive Montgomery 2050, but it's all about in a county that has always said that it values process, that it is really not, a lot of people feel like there's not been due consideration to how to move this very, very important draft forward, which will cover the development of Montgomery County for the next 30 years. So it asks for a slowdown of the process and another, a complete draft that can be reviewed again by the public with another public hearing before something goes to the county council. I do want to say that even though this was the letter that's in your package is supposed to be the final letter, there was a comment and I didn't send it out, but if you look at the last sentence in the first paragraph, which starts, "We recognize that," there's a substitute sentence, which I will read. And I think it's intended to give more credit to the planning department staff. Here's the substitute, and I can send it around if you want. "We appreciate that planning staff have devoted considerable time and energy prior to the pandemic to outreach and research and have continued to bring their expertise to bear. All of that will be useful going forward." It's pretty similar to what's there, but it's slightly different.
Okay, thank you. And before I take questions, I do want to publicly thank and congratulate Council President Schall for the incredible amount of effort and study and review and attending meetings and everything else
here,
to
here.
get us to this point. And I know that it's just sort of the beginning, but thank you so much. Council Member Zoighauser, do you have any questions?
No questions, but I echo your sentiments.
Thank you. Councilmember Peel, do you have any
Nope.
questions?
No questions from me.
Thank you. Councilmember Circo.
No questions. Thank you for
Thank
all the
you.
work.
Councilmember Barr.
I'm going to be okay with it, but I did read through it and, you know, it's not a perfect letter, but it gets the point across that the public's really given no opportunity to comment on this revised draft, and that's perfectly true. So on that basis, I'll support it.
Well, thank you. And let me remind to Councilor Barr and anybody else that even though this is being considered as a joint resolution by the council, that I'm sure that the county council would appreciate any additional comments you have that you're welcome to submit on your own. I know they would be very powerful. So thank you for your comment, Councilmember Barr. Mr. Town Manager, has any resident or guest raised their hand?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Madam President, are you prepared to make a motion?
I wanted to say that I thought that this could be jointly signed by the mayor and the town council. I don't know how they're going to format it, but we wanted to get this in front of the council to say that this was a town position. but it could
We
be
can
signed
put that
by.
in your motion that it's signed by all of us.
Okay, all right.
Are
Well,
you prepared to make a motion?
yes, I move that the council approve a letter that would be sent on behalf of the coalition to the chair of the planning department, Anderson, and members of the planning board, and that the letter we would submit our signatures for would be both the mayor and the town council.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? I see Zoighauser first. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? And with that, thank you for your efficiency. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn the council.
Moved.
And there's a second, all those in favor. Thank you. And now it's all yours, Council President Shaw.
Thank you very much. So I hope everyone receives the revised work session agenda that I sent around last night. It's a little bit shorter, so maybe we'll get through everything that's actually on the list. Just to remind people, what we're trying to do at the work session is to identify any kind of information the council believes is necessary for it to move forward with an issue, and to determine whether or not that information can be put together in a way that the item would be ready for, say, the April agenda, which is our next council meeting, or whether it would have to be postponed to a future time because we don't have enough information. So the first item on our work session list is a recommendation from the town pool committee to open the pool May 1st rather than mid-May, which is when we ordinarily open the pool. So that item is just open for discussion from.
If I may add something to, I did finally get a proposal from American Pool for that, and I added it to the drive. I didn't have time to print off hard copies, but they quoted us at $74,597.25 for the adjusted pool schedule to stay open from essentially May through October.
So is that the total for the year or just the extra for May?
That's the total. That's the extra for May and October.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, Matt. So otherwise, if we're not open in May and October, what's the charge?
I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood. It's $145,000.
Without May and October?
Correct.
Can I ask a question, or are we going in order?
No, just people, this is a conversation.
So I just wonder whether it makes sense. I don't know if this is what the pool committee really wants, but I wonder whether it makes sense to talk about May separately from October, and also maybe reserve the right to come back to this over the summer to keep the pool open in October, but to separate them out so that we don't necessarily have to vote on May plus October all at once when we get around to voting on it. I mean, at the moment, MCPS is going back to school in person. Now, there may be some percentage of Somerset residents who don't attend school in person, but they'll certainly be attending school during the school day. So, I guess I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, May 1st is 6 weeks before MCPS ends. So the population of people that we'd be talking about using the pool would not, I would think, for the most part, include the children, at least for the first part of it. I mean, I guess that's just my guess, but May 1st, I don't know. I don't know whether we're going to have a lot of children swimming in the pool. So and of course there are many other people who enjoy the pool who are not children, but let's say we divide it in half. So if we divide this and say that we're spending more than $35,000 for May, And then the same amount for October, presumably, you know, are we really talking about spending $35,000 on having the pool open in May when, you know, the kids are going back to school? I mean, of course, the same is true for October. The kids are going to be in school. So just reminding everybody that it's not the same as when we get to June 15th. You know, I know that we've tried to get numbers before of how many people have used the pool during the off season. And it might be sort of interesting to know kind of what we spend, you know, well, how we spend the money, you know, how many dollars per resident we spend kind of over the cycle of the summer. I'm sure it would change, but that seems like a lot to me. I don't know. Maybe we can break it down. Talk about May separately. I can't
Trying
hear you more.
to determine, again, we're trying to determine what information would people like to have before they would even be able to
Right.
make a decision about this. So I'm hearing Franny say it would be
Can
good
you
to
just
know.
remind me, since I don't have the proposal in front, what are the hours that they're proposing for May and for October? What would be the pool hours?
They usually do 1 to 8, don't they?
1 to 8 Monday through Thursday, 1 to 9 on Friday, 10 to 9 Saturday, 10 to 8 Sunday. So in other words, opening at 1 o'clock on weekdays.
Will the water be heated in May?
Yes, so that's the other element, is that this does not account for the gas, the cost of gas, which was significantly higher this year, particularly for the month of October in comparison to the summer months at the pool.
Another,
I'm sorry.
sorry,
Go ahead.
another information, Matt, because that one sheet that you gave us in here seems to represent just the one attachment seems to represent many people, but just a few families. So I would be interested not only in the number of people that use the pool in the off season, but the number of families, of different homes rather. So if it's just like, does that make sense to you, Matt?
Yeah, in other words, how many individual households?
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be important to me.
I guess I would also want to know whether they would be willing to scale back on the hours and days of the week. I mean, this seems like a lot of open pool time. I mean, 1 through 8, Monday through Thursday, 1 through 9, Friday, starting May 1st. I just don't know how many people are going to be swimming outside, even if we do heat the pool.
I can ask about that. I think part of American Pool's reasoning for that was these are times of the year that are outside of the norm for hiring lifeguards.
Right.
And so I think we do bear some cost for them having somebody there, even if they're not with us.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's
One of the things the budget committee is working on at the moment is our money available, our incoming budget, our revenues for this year, because they're way off. That is to say, we're looking like current estimates show us as below our austerity budget for the year. Now, not all the data are in yet. We think there might even be an accounting error. There's a lot going on then, but I'm going to put it out this way. If we have to use our rainy day fund this year, would extending the pool season be something that we would be willing to use rainy day funds for?
I guess I just have
That
a
fits the discussion of the rainy day fund, really.
I mean, you know, we're talking about whether or not we can afford to buy a new truck for the maintenance crew. You know, I don't know. I think it would be worth asking the pool committee whether they'd give us some kind of a compromise proposal that would be maybe Friday, Saturday, Sundays. And then defer the discussion on October until we see what the pool usage is this year. I mean, I guess people won't be as worried about COVID, but, you know, we still just don't really know how many people are going to be around and swimming and so on.
Franny, I'm not an expert on pools, but my recollection is that the pool people would say you have to have staff there 7 days a week to take care of the pool, whether it is open 7 days a week or not. But we would need to find out more. It sounds like we don't have nearly enough information to make a decision. And to me, it sounds like the kinds of information we would need include what would be the per day cost for each of those days in May. That would be additional days open for American Pool. What would be the per day cost for Somerset for the things that Somerset pays for, like the gas? And you might
Right.
have to make an estimate based on October's gas use and how much that costs. And then I think we would need kind of during October, what was the per day and also per household count of usage?
Another, I think you're right, Maureen, but I think another way to do this would also be to say, what is the dollar amount that we're comfortable spending on pre-season swimming? And we could also go back to the pool committee and say, put together what you want to make work for 25,000 and, you know, see what they come up with if they negotiate with American Pool. You know what I mean? Like I do think it would be nice to have all that data, but on the other hand, part of me thinks if what we're really worried about is money, maybe it'd be better just to say, what's our comfort zone on what we can spend, what we think we can put, you know, toward this, and then tell them what can you make work within that frame. It's just another idea. I don't know what people think of it, but maybe it's simpler than rather than making us analyze the data, you know, sort of say, you know, figure out where your swimmers are, what day of the week they come in, what time they come in, and here's your budget for lifeguarding and your budget for gas. Just an idea for the work session. So
I have a question, Matt. Would to open the pool in May, would that come out of the current fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay, so because I definitely hear Robin and I'm very sensitive to that. So I guess the first question for you is how much money can you find? Or can you find any? Because if you can't find any, then there's no reason to put together all this data. But if you can find some, then I myself would like to look at all the data.
Yeah, I can look into that to give you a more specific answer, but generally what I would say is the money that I could find this, Robin brought up something that's sort of an underlying issue long-term that isn't realized quite this year, but long-term, we're looking at deficits. This year, we're not quite there yet, but closing the gap of our expenditures to income this year only serves to heighten the issue over the 5-year plan.
So I guess, Robin, the question for the budget committee before the council spends a lot of time and energy, and particularly Matt spends a lot of time and energy on pulling together this data, is that worthwhile, or can we just not afford to open the pool early this year? As our, you know.
Well, I mean, they're meeting tomorrow, and obviously Marnie and I can bring it up with them. I think from the emails that have been going back and forth, we're still unhappy that we have full information from the controller's office. And so we're trying to get back to Controller's office, and I don't know whether the Budget Committee would be able to answer it without hearing more from Controller's office.
What about, Matt, the windfall that you sent around?
That's also something that we're still a little bit in the dark on. We are in the language of the this is not just a economic recovery package that was passed. This is also stimulus. And so the town of Somerset is receiving a little under $1.1 million, I should say is eligible for a little under $1.1 million. What's not clear quite yet is what types of expenditures, what types of services are eligible for that money. It's almost sounded too good to be true so far. So
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So I was on, I attended the National League of Cities conference this week, and they were very vague. They're very congratulatory about all these municipalities getting this money, but I don't think it's going to be without purse strings. I think it's really intended for people in need. So like rent subsidy and PPP. So I don't think that we can, and I think they just passed the bill yesterday, right? And I don't think it's clear. And I think that we should not, just like Matt says, I don't think we should be counting on getting any of that, because it's not really intended for municipalities like ours that don't have a huge number of people in need. And I don't think it's intended so that we can open our pool a month early. Honestly,
It's only 2 weeks, actually, because we do open.
well, whatever it is, I don't think that we should do budgeting based on the fact that we might get $1 million.
I agree with Jeffrey, and I think what they're saying is that the Treasury Department is going to put out rules for how the money can be used. And so I think if that's true, until we know what kinds of things would be eligible, we really can't count on that money at all.
Right.
Matt, are they charging us? Marnie says it's just 2 weeks early. Are they charging us $35,000 or $40,000 to open 2 weeks early in May?
Well, I think when you were talking about you were sort of simplifying it and thinking about, okay, well, half of this is May, half of this is October. I think probably a closer approximation is a third of it is May and 2/3 of it is October, because normally we close at the very end of September. And in this instance, we're closing at the end of October. So you've got, 4 weeks in October, 2 weeks in May.
Got it.
But they're charging us, so $25,000 to open 2 weeks early in May.
Yeah, which is about, our current contract, we pay about $24,000 a month for the months that the pool is open. And so that sort of jives with that.
It could be more like 12.
It doesn't jive.
It doesn't, it's double.
Well, I guess I just mean that our contract is $140,000 for 6 months of the pool for June, July, August, September, for 4
2
months.
weeks in May.
So
4
it's
months and 2 weeks. It's because we usually open like May 20th or somewhere like that.
right. So
Well, I mean, while you're thinking about it, as my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we extended the pool season last year partly or mainly because it didn't start in May because of the pandemic.
Right, right.
So as to give people an adequate season, we extended it into October, and that made sense to me, and that was fine. This year, what the pool committee is asking for is an extended season that
Yeah.
stretches from May 1st all the way through to the end of October, which, you know, is 2 months longer than the season, and obviously the costs are much higher. And so it is a very different kind of request, and we should see it in that light because it is very different.
But it's only, as I'm understanding it from Marnie, it's only adding 2 weeks in May.
Plus October, and I said, the point
Yeah,
is that October is, last year, actually, the costs were partly covered by the fact that we didn't open early,
I know.
and therefore they were applied to October.
But as
That's
Fran-
not true this year. They will be fresh costs this year in October.
But as Franny said, we could look at them separately. We could look at May apart from October, which I would be willing to do.
Yeah.
Particularly with such a nice day like today.
Let's
And-
open in March, eh?
The money, I mean, to me, it's just a question of finding the money for 2 weeks. If we have the money, I would definitely like to consider it since it is just 2 weeks.
Barbara, would you like to consider it even if it turns out there are only 10 people a day using the pool?
Well, we'll
Mm.
be comparing it to October, which I think is not, necessarily a good comparison. But no, if Matt can find the money, then I would like to look at all the data. If Matt can't find the money, then for me personally, I'm not interested in putting Matt on the hamster wheel to find the data because what's the point? So
Yeah, I'm with Barbara on
Well,
that.
Shouldn't,
I also think if we are going to ask them to look forward for data, I would like to know comparatively how much it costs to heat the pool in October, because it sounds to me like it's not just a cost for the American Pool contract. And then we may in fact have a lot more money than we would need to spend to open it for a month in October. So I would want to know how much would it truly cost? What's the complete cost for opening in October? And then we're giving them plenty of time to find out and tell us.
I agree.
So,
well, I think we'll have some kind of update on the budget overall on Monday night when we do our first work session, and the budget committee is going to make a presentation. We're probably not going to know the full extent of the year for a little while, but that'll give you a clue
So Marnie,
firsthand.
you do think that come Monday night, we'll have some pretty significant information for our first budget meeting?
Well, I won't know for sure till after tomorrow's budget meeting, but, and the other thing is, we're just not too sure about the lag time of receipts. It seems like things are a little bit off this year or else we're in deep trouble. So I think another month, by the time we get to actually have to pass the annual budget for next year, we should know quite a bit. I'm hoping we'll know somewhat more on Monday night. So to see whether we can summarize where we are on this issue, maybe as of Monday night, we'll have a better idea of what our overall budget constraints are,
yeah.
which will give us some guidance to Matt. If it seems as though things are dire, what I'm hearing is let's not even try to open and let's not bother collecting a lot of data. If the budget numbers are a little bit better than we might anticipate, then we would ask Matt to get some of the kinds of data we discussed today and
Mhm.
have that available for the meeting in April.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
yeah.
Okay.
Also, the last thing would be like, how much notice do we have to give American Pool before we decide? Like, I mean, if we decide in April, are they going to be able to pivot and open May 1st? So
That's a
that would be another question.
Okay.
So maybe we can revisit this a little bit during Monday night's meeting in terms of giving Matt guidance. Is that okay?
works.
All right. Well, the next item on our agenda is to talk about Camp Somerset's proposal to use town land and the tennis courts. And so what information do people want? As I understand it, the tennis committee has said it's fine with them for Camp Somerset to use the courts.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that that was a question for me. Right now, the only request is to use the tennis courts. And it would just be for the second two sessions of Camp Somerset. So they sent some information that you have about limiting the number of kids on the tennis court at a time. They contacted the tennis committee, who voted to approve Camp Somerset using the tennis courts as usual this summer. They also had brought up potentially using the town space, but I don't think they quite know. I don't think they have their ducks in a row quite yet on that, so they don't have an ask for that for you at this time.
Everybody comfortable putting this on the April agenda?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. The next item is the Pepco charging station. Who wants to lead off on this one?
Well, I can introduce quickly. So since I sent out the packet, Pepco did send a actual site proposal for you. Their proposal actually included 4 parking spaces. However, at this time, the Environment Committee has only considered and recommended 2 parking spaces, 2 charging stations for the town to approve. What's not entirely clear to me is if Pepco has some minimum that they need to install per location. The response, Marnie, I don't know if you took it the same way, but Tammy had sort of said, yeah, well, we can look at other spots in town if you only want 2 at the tennis court. And I didn't necessarily know if that meant
Leave it.
we need more than 2. We need to put in more than 2, and you pick the spots, but it needs to be more than 2, or if she was just encouraging us to look at other places as well. I'm not entirely clear on that.
Can I ask a question from people who have been to the environmental committee meetings? Can you give me an understanding of who people expect will be using the charging stations and when? Because if I were living on Cumberland across from the town hall, I'm not totally sure that I would be happy to have the general public using the parking lot of the tennis courts, especially if it was overnight or something like that. I just don't have a good sense of who. I understand the point of them, and I understand that they could be very useful for town residents who are playing tennis or attending a meeting at the town hall, or even people who live near enough to the town hall but don't have a charging station at their house. But beyond that, I just don't really have a good picture in my mind of who would be using the charging stations behind our tennis courts and when they would be doing it. And so maybe could somebody just talk me through how that would how the environmental committee envisions that?
Well, I think one of the reasons that they did not endorse the idea of 4 stations is because they weren't clear that there would be a need for 4 stations. They could see, for example, let's say that you have a visitor who to your home over the weekend who comes with an electric car, but you don't happen to have an electric car or an electric charger at your house. It would be a way for family guests to be able to have their cars charged. These have to be publicly available spaces. So it's possible that landscapers who are working in town could charge their vehicles. It's possible that somebody commuting through Montgomery County would want to charge their stations. But as I read the license agreement, I'm certainly not an attorney, but it seemed like these 4 spots that Pepco was proposing would have to be permanently sort of set aside from other uses
Right.
and held for just potential chargers.
Yeah,
Do we have any concerns that people would drive in and park their car and walk down to the metro? Leave their car there all day?
their site, they are supposed to be for cars that are charging. And I suppose somebody could leave their car all day if it was charging all day. The reason why I asked the question when they presented was this kind of thing, which is there a booking system available?
Yeah.
And the answer was that the company that owns the stations is working on a booking system. And if a booking system is available, then I think we can handle that. Exactly. You just say you've got to book first before you use the spot. But I don't know when that booking system is going to become available. That's something we can ask Tammy to find out.
Then what happens if people don't follow those rules, but just pull up and plug in their cars? I mean, I wonder, I guess I'm more concerned about people leaving their cars there overnight or using it as a commuting parking space. And like, I'm fine with people who, if they want to come visit a friend in the town of Somerset and drop their car off to charge for a couple of hours, that seems to me to be a great idea, especially since probably most houses don't have a place to do that. And I like that idea. I like the idea of landscaping trucks that might need to stop by for like maybe half an hour or something, but I just don't have an understanding of how charging stations actually work. I mean, I've seen the one at the Safeway. I like that idea. You go into the Safeway and shop for a while, that you can plug in your car while you're doing that. It sort of ties in to me in a logical way. But I'm picturing the back of our tennis courts, which are being used by children and families and teenagers. And now we're introducing a very random element, which makes me nervous. So
How long does it take for a car to charge?
I don't know.
Well, they're level 2 chargers, and it depends on the model of car, obviously. But for most of the cars that are sold today, it's roughly from no charge to full charge is about 8 hours. But most times cars are partially charged when you top them up with electricity. So an hour or two on the charger is probably going to be sufficient for that kind of thing. Again, the booking systems makes it all apparent who is doing the booking. You have a record of who it is. It's altogether a much safer way to do it. And they are working on the booking system. And that's why I said, let's go for this, because, the opportunity is there. I think it is a point to ask Tammy, when will the booking system become available? The other point is that charging stations going in here, Pepco is putting charging stations all around the community. I mean, they're really making an effort. There is already charging stations in county garages in Bethesda, for example.
Yeah.
And there's charging stations in private garages too. I know several garages that are like that. So when strangers are around, they have a lot of choice where to go, and the likelihood that they're going to find by accident that the ones by our tennis courts is low. So I don't think there's a high risk of strangers in what I hope is the short time until the booking system becomes available. And when the booking system is available, then as I said, we've got complete information and we are in good shape.
And remember, it's not free. It's not free either.
Yeah, you've got to use a credit card for them,
It's not free.
or Apple Pay or whatever.
If we had
Madam
a,
President, could I suggest that if and when this comes before the council, that we make sure that Tammy's there, because these are a lot of good questions that only Tammy can answer.
Oh, yeah,
Planning
yeah.
on coming to the April meeting. She also offered to be at the work session, but it seemed like we weren't trying to have other folks talking in our work session beyond the council. And really what we're trying to do is identify questions, and we can, Matt, if you want to get back to Tammy, or I can, give her a heads up on this. I was surprised when I saw the proposal that it suddenly morphed from 2 to 4.
Yeah,
And I also was sort of surprised that the location was right up against the tennis court fence as opposed to the other side. I don't know how they wound up choosing it, except maybe that electricity is more accessible on that side.
Right,
Um,
I did share it with Carrie Walford, who's chair of the tennis committee, actually, that, and I, you know, the understanding is 2 would be okay from the tennis committee. That's her reaction. She hasn't shared it with the tennis committee yet. 4 would, it's too many spaces in the parking lot, and, you know, it would crowd out the tennis players, basically, is what it comes down to.
I have a question, one on the, well, 2 questions actually. One on the first one is typically when we put in lighting in the parking lot, we went to the people whose yards are adjacent to that parking lot, just to run it by them, to get some buy-in from them on what we plan to add to the parking lot. And I wondered if we might be able to do that just as a courtesy. And then also, Robin, if there is a booking system, which I think is a great idea, who would enforce it though? What if somebody drove in, left their car there at 7 a.m, got on the metro, and they'd only booked for a short time, but they didn't get back till 6 o'clock at night at the end of the day? Who would enforce that?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Tammy might know the answer to that question, but the responsibility, I think, lies with the owner of the charging stations for that kind of thing.
Great, thank you.
I think that is the wild, wild west. And I think that's a very good question, and that could be a big concern.
Yeah, I worry.
Because that could happen. And I mean, the ones, I don't think any of the charging stations that we see in public garages and everything are in any way regulated. But that's a good question. But I doubt that the county garage people go and give a ticket to a car that is there too long. I don't think, I'm not sure they've even gotten to that point yet.
But they also have their own security systems and whatever they are, whether it's cameras, you know, I'm sure the Safeway lot has some cameras in it, and probably the public lots do too. And, you know,
well, the ones at the Safeway, I don't think those are owned by Pepco, and those aren't any good anyway. Those aren't, as what Robin said, you know, those aren't the high.
oh, okay.
There. I mean, you go in there and you stay for an hour and you get 1 mile.
Okay.
They're worthless. But
Oh.
new technology is going to come into. But anyway,
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I mean, in terms of getting back to the environmental committee, I guess my takeaway on this would be, I don't think we're ready for this right now. And even though Pepco wants to put them into place, I think, you know, it might be better for us to say we're interested, but we don't want to be in the first wave. You know, maybe that we want to see how it works in terms of their booking system and the security and I don't know. I like the idea and concept, but you know, I could also just as easily see sort of having one at the tennis courts and one at the pool, just because then people in our community who have those kinds of cars might find them to be amenities, you know? But
We
beyond
talked
that,
we talked about the pool parking lot last night, but you know, we lock the gates because it's way
Oh, yeah.
dark and we
Yeah,
don't really want cars way back in there.
Right,
And
right.
this would have to be open in order to make it comply with the public use.
right.
So
Yeah,
I think the only place that works in our town right now that we could think of was
Right.
the parking
true.
lot here.
yeah, Franny, I think, you know, we do need to be a little bit bolder than you're suggesting. You know?
Well, but I don't have a sense of what the plan is.
It's, in other words, you know, electric cars are a part, you know, first of all, the coming wave.
Yeah, I get it.
They are indeed the answer to the transportation problem in terms of carbon dioxide
Yeah,
emissions,
yeah.
because they don't emit. And so our tone, to help that way, it's a good thing if we put in electric car
But
chargers.
who is it a good thing for in our town? I understand your
Well,
point,
I mean,
environmentally and for the world and the planet. I get all that. I'm trying to find out.
I don't know how many people who own electric cars in
Yeah.
town have their own chargers at home.
Another good question, yeah.
And so I don't know how many would use them as their primary charging station.
Mhm.
But I do know that the number of electric cars in town is growing steadily. And so there's going to be more demand from in town for those charging stations because of that. And similarly, as the Environment Committee pointed out, people visiting from elsewhere with the electric cars would certainly gravitate towards those level 2 chargers because they're much better than plugging your electric car into the outlet at your neighbor's home, where you would have to stay a long time in order to charge your car.
Right, I
Let me
understand
ask
that.
this question. Robert.
Honestly, everybody in town that has an electric car has a charging station at their house because they're not going to run over to the town hall.
That's what I'm wondering.
The best reason to have this charging station at the town hall is because in the future, hopefully, we will have a electric truck or something.
Right,
And if we're getting it for free, I think that if we put it in now, as long as we have a lot of control over regulating it and it's free, we should take it.
okay.
But as long as we can regulate all this stuff, and that's what we would need to find out from Tammy.
Yeah. Okay.
We talked about that issue last night, Jeffrey.
Need more information.
Some people said that there would be a less expensive charger that would probably be put in the garage. I know nothing about this, but I'm just repeating.
And also,
Probably, but the technology is going to change, and I mean, from my perspective as an electric car owner who has their own thing there, the best reason to get this now is that it's free, and if we can regulate it, we should take it and
Mhm.
worry about all those other good questions you have later.
So do we have to take 4 of them?
Well,
Don't know.
that's another question. to
No,
Tammy.
we don't have to take any of them, but
But I'm wondering, it sounded like there was a question mark as to whether or not this was like if we're gonna do it, we
now
want
you have to ask Tammy. I never heard that because I'm the one that, told her from the beginning that we wanted to be considered.
Okay,
I think what Tammy has said, Franny, is this program of putting chargers in for free is
Yeah.
sort of drawing to a close for Pepco. And they
okay,
want to get as many chargers out there as possible. And that's why they proposed 4 for our town. But there was no support last night at the Environment Committee for 4.
yeah.
But
And in fact, there was some question
it's
about,
the council's judgment. The Environment Committee, of course, said they don't know how to. You're evaluating on a different basis than the Environment Committee.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of good questions were raised here. But I do hope that if it's free and we can regulate it, that we get it. But other than
But
that.
are we going to ask the residents of Cumberland what they think or not?
Well, why not? But
Well,
I
I'm
don't know why, I don't know
wondering
how it affects, I don't
you're
know,
saying the
I don't know
program
how
is
it affects
closing.
those residents, but
Well, Barbara raised the
don't know.
point about the
I don't know.
streetlights and we talked to them about those and everything, but I just think if you're saying that the program is closing and that we have to sort of take advantage of this opportunity, I'm asking the question, are we going to build time in to talk to the residents who live across from the town hall?
But
well, on
it's all the residents that need to wait.
Of course, all the residents need to weigh in, but when you're talking about Mark Oxley, whose driveway is next to this charging station, I think it's also a courtesy for us to consider asking whether.
it's in his driveway. He has an easement.
Well, whatever. My point is that he goes back and forth through there, every day. I think it would be worth finding out what he thinks about basically opening up 4 of those parking spaces to the general public. They are not otherwise opened up to the public,
Well,
right?
They are open to the public now.
But
They're
only for
public
people who
spaces.
are coming to the town hall or using the tennis courts. We do not allow people to park there and commute downtown. We allow people in the public
I
who are
know,
coming
but that's why we need to ask Tammy. I think we're allowed to control.
I don't think so. I thought she said from the beginning, these have to be open to everybody.
Well, they
remember
are,
her
but they
saying-
can be, I know, but we need to ask her because I think that it's subject to interpretation.
If we're talking about town residents and their guests, it's a very
We need to
different
ask- we need
conversation.
to Ask Tammy. I don't know about that. I don't know the answer.
But I think that she was clear that it was not, we could not limit it to people in town.
Yeah,
Correct,
no,
it
Right,
has
but
to,
we
because
can
we have to
still-
change the signage.
But we can still, but we wouldn't be limited to people in town, but
I
we
mean-
can still regulate our parking lot.
No, I mean, the parking lot is not limited to people in town anyway. I mean, because,
Right.
you know, certainly when I was playing tennis there, my visitor who I played tennis with regularly did not live in town, but he parked his car
That's
there,
right.
and that's true of
That's
many
not-
others, you
Sure,
know.
No, but you didn't, I specifically said people who are coming to the town hall or people who are you coming to the tennis courts or using that park. That's a different purpose than basically somebody who's driving down Wisconsin Avenue and says,
I
can go
don't,
pull over
that's
here
why
for a
we need
couple
to
hours.
ask Tammy what she means by
let-
asking
I mean,
the public.
Let me refresh everybody's memory a little bit. After 12 years on the council, we did have a former resident, someone who no longer lives in town, but a former resident who did park in the tennis parking lot for a long time until, this was prior to Matt's time, for quite a long time until we finally asked them not to park there anymore. So Franny is correct. People will park there and then they will commute downtown. Once people find out about it, that's what will happen. And it has happened already.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and the licensing agreement says we have to have it put up a sign that it says it's for the public.
That's what I was referring to.
And,
Yeah.
and only for charging electric cars too.
Yeah.
Of course.
Licensing agreement.
Which brings me, Ron, did you have a chance to take a look at the licensing agreement that Pepco says it's having all of the people who they're putting these stations in for sign?
No,
Did
I've
you-
not yet reviewed the agreement.
That would be something I think that would be good to do. I mean, I
Okay.
underlined certain things that were in that agreement that I think we want to be aware of, whether or not we take any issue with.
I will do so.
Right,
Okay.
and I mean, the idea, and Barbara, the way things are with electric cars now is that if you are in an electric car, you are most likely to find a charging station in the garage by your office where you park. And that's where you would charge your car, and you're working all day and your car charges during the day and you drive away again. It's by far the most convenient way to do it. It would be very extraordinary for someone to do this in our tennis courts when the facilities are there already around their offices and in their offices. And that's increasingly so because charging stations are going in everywhere.
But what about if they metro downtown, Robin? They don't drive their car downtown. They
Well, if you metro downtown, are you really going to park your car 15 minutes away from the metro station? I
People do
mean,
that all the
really?
time. Right, people park their car on Fallstone and on Dorset in order to walk over to the metro. It is a regular thing during non-COVID times. There are cars parked from Virginia, on the corner of Fallstone and Warwick in order for people to walk through to the Friendship Heights metro station. I've seen it for 20 years now. It's a thing. Maybe
that-
not a lot, but it's a thing. We can't say it doesn't happen.
And that's why we had to change the signage. Again, this was prior to your time on the council, Robin. We had to change the signage for parking on Dorset because people were doing just that. They were parking on Dorset and then walking to the metro. So this is, over the years, you will learn.
Everybody knows that.
Well, all right, but I mean, it still comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that there are far easier charging stations to use for these
Yeah.
individuals.
And the most smart people and the most efficient people will do it your way, but I think we just have to ask the question. This is a work session where we can talk about all these possibilities and just talk about what our thoughts are about them. That doesn't mean, I still like the idea of doing it. I want to know how it
The
works.
most likely possibility is that people will use the parking spots who don't have electric cars and block electric cars from using them because that is the history around the world, and it's that
Another
is
problem.
the most likely
Yeah.
problem.
Yes, the agreement, the licensing agreement says that those spaces will be only reserved only for people charging their cars.
So who enforces that?
Yes,
Well, I don't know. We can talk about
Our
that.
police officers?
So we have a list of questions. So to answer Jeffrey's concern, Tammy will be at the April meeting. Do we feel like we're ready to have this conversation with Tammy in April? There were a number of questions raised.
I'm fine with having Tammy come to the April meeting, but I don't want to be in a position of having to vote on this in May just because she comes in April. I guess I'll put it that way. I think there are going to be enough things that she won't be able to answer, or that we won't be able to control and regulate on this. And, you know, maybe it's possible to get the charging stations, but not activate them until we're ready. I don't know. I just really don't even know how they work, but I feel like I have more questions than answers even after today.
Okay, well, I think, Matt, either you or I need to get back to Tammy with some of the concerns that were raised. See if she has more fact sheets that she could provide ahead of time, and then be ready to answer a number of questions. One of the things I'd intended to do, and I didn't do it on the earlier issues, is I think we should be doing some journal articles on topics like this to alert residents. If we're going to be talking about this at the April meeting, this is a way to alert nearby residents that this could be coming, and to list sort of what the proposal is and any concerns people have.
So is it possible for the environmental committee to do some of the legwork on getting the answers so that we don't have to wait until April and hearing them from Tammy, or write this article for the journal?
Steve, what do you think?
we can certainly ask the Environment Committee. I know they're working on a number of topics, and I'm not sure how responsive PEPCO will be in answering questions, but we can certainly ask the questions. I think that's an appropriate thing to do.
We can also ask Tammy to provide information ahead of time that we can circulate, that Matt could send out. I think this is why Tammy wanted to be at the work session, because she figured that there might be a lot of questions, but I think this was a good discussion.
I like Marnie's idea a lot of having a journal article. So whoever is the driving, I'm not sure who's the driving force behind this, but I think a journal article would be very helpful to the community. Is it the Environment Committee that's driving this, or is it PEPCO? Or, I mean, could PEPCO put together an article? Could
Well,
Tammy?
we could have some side-by-side articles, actually. We could have PEPCO write something about it, and we could have, the Environment Committee originally took this up. I think last night there was more back and forth about what, you know, whether this was a fabulous idea. Certainly they didn't like the idea of 4 stations. And one person on the committee expressed some reservation about any at this point.
Interesting. Well, I think if we don't put it out to the community, as Franny said, we're certainly not ready to make a decision in May, because if the community isn't even,
April,
I mean, vote on it in May, you know, if it hasn't even been thrown out to the community for discussion, then we're certainly not ready.
well, maybe we could have several different articles in the journal, you know, like sort of PEPCO's, something from an environmental perspective. I don't know if there's any other perspectives. Jeffrey, maybe you would write about it in your column.
I'd be happy to.
Okay. So Steve, are you going to talk with the Environment Committee about writing an article?
Yes, so I'll talk with Barton.
And Matt, you and I can talk with Tammy?
Steve, can I ask?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
When you talk to Barton, can you ask him, like, for people like me who truly just don't even know how these work, could you ask him to include some very basic information about how the charging stations work and how long they take and just those kind of things. I mean, that might be like stuff that Barton already knows, but if he could assume that he's writing an article for people who don't know, then I think that would be helpful.
And if
Okay,
Barton
well, then-
doesn't, and if Barton doesn't know, Steve, rather than having him have to go off and do a lot of research, maybe Tammy can provide that information too.
Yeah, they should have a little info sheet that they can provide.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, can I just go back then, since I'm thinking about journal articles, is there anybody who wants to write about opening the pool early? Should we ask Matt Saff to write it?
We should ask Matt Zaff, but let's wait on that until we find out from Matt where we are with our budget numbers.
Okay, we can talk about that Monday night. How's
Yeah,
that?
so before we encourage Matt by asking him to write an article, you know, I think it'll be better just to see where we are, because if we're gonna just say no anyway, then
Okay,
I don't want
Alright.
to ask him to write an article.
okay. All right, are we ready to move on? Okay, well, the personnel manual, I'm not sure what the plan is for the council to take a look at that. Maybe, I don't know whether Jeffrey or Matt, you want to say anything before we move on to the apiaries?
Matt can give you an update. And Matt and Ron give you an update.
Sure. So the three of us met yesterday actually to go over some preliminary changes to the personnel manual. Ron actually has, correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, but I don't think Ron was part of writing the original personnel manual, and it hasn't been updated since 2011. So there were some things that we just wanted to make sure while we're at it, have Ron put an eye on it, make sure that any, labor law related issues are updated and accurate. But just high level, a lot of the changes are updating clerk treasurer to manager and council vice president to president. So some of them are just correcting the vernacular in there. But in any case, we should have an update. Would you, Marnie, you'd like a draft for the council to consider at a work session? Is that what you would like?
Well, actually, we could ask this group and see if you all feel like you'll have a personnel manual ready for the April council meeting. We could just jump in at the April council meeting. I don't know whether people would like a chance to review it at a work session first, or whether it's fine to just go ahead and put it on the agenda.
So, Madam President, as Matt pointed out, our current outstanding town attorney has never
Award-winning town attorney.
award-winning, has never even looked at it. And so I think that what we kind of decided yesterday is that he will review the entire document, because some of it is, there's a lot of stuff in the personnel manual that's not really personnel manual stuff. It probably should be in a different document that's given to employees. So I thought the best thing would be for Ron to review it and then bring it back to next month's work session and then put it in May. Because I think that.
Okay with everybody?
I think that to me, that's what seemed to meet the needs of the manager and would be on a timeline for the town attorney, and also would give council members ample opportunity to review and ask questions at the work session next month. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, I would just add to that currently the manual includes procedures that probably don't belong in the manual, as the mayor noted. And I would envision separating it into two documents. One could be internal procedures for how employment decisions are made, hiring and firing, budgeting, so forth. And then a separate manual that's just given to employees containing the information they care about.
Good. Yeah,
Well, it's definitely time for updating and reviewing our personnel manual. So that's great. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the proposal that's been a recommendation of the Environment Committee of an apiary for Somerset. There was an article in this month's journal about some ideas about the apiary. I don't know, Steve, you want to say a few words?
So what about the apiary civet? So this is an initiative of the Environment Committee, and the objective is to bring a beehive onto town property. There's no cost for the beehive. There will be a small cost for the town to put up a fence around the beehive. The idea is just, it's a pro-environment thing to do and good for all the gardeners and folks in the town. But we need to have a vote in the near future, because the beehive has to be moved prior to like the middle of spring. You need to move the beehive while the bees are dormant.
where exactly are they proposing putting it on the town property?
They've looked at two spots. One, the town, the large plot of land near the basketball court, near Wisconsin. But I think they're leaning towards the parkland by the little stream that goes through, where a bunch of trees were cut down for that work that was done a while ago. So there's a bit of an open space. And the
Oh,
beehive needs a bit of an open space. That would get it away from
people.
general traffic.
Yeah, that's really good to know, Steve, because I was really worried about the idea of having bees near people. I mean, people who are not worried about bees or bee stings don't maybe think about this, but I just the idea. First of all, the basketball courts I think are on. I mean, I think we technically own the land, but I think it's a county park, so I wasn't sure whether we could actually put bees there
Yeah.
because it's a county park. And then I was just also worried about, I mean, we rent the town hall and that yard next to the town hall for parties and everything. And just, it just seemed like an attractive nuisance to me to put it there, but putting it in the land over where we had the WSSC work done makes a lot more sense to me. Does it need maintenance?
No, well, not maintenance in terms of like moving parts.
Yeah,
It needs the beekeeper to come and take the honey away once a year.
right. But we
And
could
the
allow
beekeeper
that.
might
Yeah.
look for volunteers from the Environment Committee. The Environment Committee is willing to help out. And there are very preliminary discussions about maybe the town can get some jars of Somerset honey to pass out to new residents, something like that. Apparently, they harvest the honey once a year, and one hive produces something like 60 to 80 pounds of honey. So it's a lot of honey.
Wow. And they do that for us? The beekeepers would process the honey?
The beekeeper does it. This is her business. I don't know if it's a hobby or an avocation.
Yeah,
And that's why I said the discussions are still ongoing as to whether or not we can just receive, I don't know, 20 small jars or whatever to
Right.
pass out to new residents.
Madam President, she would be at the meeting, right?
I don't know that we've talked about that, but we could certainly ask whether she could. come.
I think that you
That'd be a good
definitely,
idea.
just like every other contractor vendor, I think you definitely, because these are all really important questions.
Why are
Mhm.
we thinking about public land? It seems that in the write-up, all the other ones are in backyards or where people or the owner of the property can keep an eye on it, because it does seem, according to the write-up, that it does need some maintenance. And also just having it out in the open gives me pause, having known two people that ended up in the hospital because a bee happened, one was on a class trip, and a mom at the zoo was stung just by a bee, and another one, a child was playing soccer, and as she was running, her mouth was open and a bee happened to go in her mouth. So it wasn't that they were swatting at them or anything. It was just
Mhm.
timing. So
Well, I have the same question. And that's why I wouldn't make the decision without her there to satisfy you, because I totally agree. About the public land, which I had the same question, Councilmember Zoighauser, and I asked the chair, I talked to the chair today, and the committee wants to set an example for other municipalities to follow. That is what he told me was the reason. And the other concern that I had is that they're proposing this as a trial. They would be reevaluated after a year. This is not
Mhm.
like a unwanted gift that we are going to be bound to.
Mhm.
So the idea is that if the council were to approve it, then it would just be for a time certain and it would be reevaluated.
Okay.
And then I also had a concern, as the council president knows, about the whole procurement aspect of this, even though we don't have procurement rules. But the chair of the committee assured me that he opened this opportunity. Apparently, there's a group of professional beekeepers, whether they're, I don't know if it's for profit or not. I don't think it matters. But apparently, he opened this opportunity to a group, and this was the only beekeeper that came forward that was willing to do it for free. But I would think that you would want to have, just like you had with the Black Lives Matter Library, and an agreement with the resident that as to how, I would think that you would want this to be reviewed, have an MOU or something, whatever the town attorney recommends, so that, we are protected in every way.
Yeah.
Because this opens up, as Councilmember Peel knows so well, about potential, what's our liability
Yeah.
that's
for all this?
ask Ron. Ron, if I realize that there will be signage and we'll be putting up, and Barton has offered to put up a fence. But if it's just like at the pool house, where there are signs that say you're not, don't go in. And this will be much the same as the pool house, and there'll be a fence. But if kids go into the bees on a dare or whatever, will the town have any liability?
Well, it depends on the facts and circumstances. So the liability would be based on a claim of negligence. So the plaintiff would have to prove that the town was negligent somehow. And I don't know enough about the proposal or case law on liability with respect to bees to give you a complete answer there.
Don't we have some protection for exposure for things that happen in the parkland?
So, I mean, the town does have limited liability based on the Maryland contract, the Maryland Tort Claims Act.
Yeah.
So, liability is generally limited to, I believe the limits now are 400,000 per occurrence, per plaintiff, and 800,000 per incident.
Mhm.
You maintain insurance to cover you, but it's not always just a question of dollars and cents. It's also, is it a reasonable decision with respect to keeping your residents and visitors safe?
Right.
And I have to do some research to look into that, and what risks are actually presented by bees. I've wanted to have bees myself, but there are restrictions on regarding how much land you have to have, and
Yeah,
then so on. Because I mean, bees can go over a fence, of course.
for sure. Yeah.
The
Ron?
neighbors
Yeah.
had bees in their backyard. One of their sons did for quite some time. And I just wonder whether this would be something that would be better off in somebody's backyard rather. I mean, is this something that, Matt, you have again, the time to monitor? It just seems we're asking an awful, even.
My understanding of the article I read, written by Barton, is that the beekeeper is taking responsibility for maintenance of the hives and the bees.
Right.
And she is trained. She has taken coursework on that, so she knows what she's
How do
doing.
we know that? How do we know that that's going to happen? I believe that the beekeeper is a good professional, but it's just these are areas that are kind of outside of the scope of our town government, and I just don't know. Like sometimes you engage contractors that rip you off, and I'm not. Who knows? Maybe this person's a great person and
Right,
not
and
not
I think
to rip us off. But
I
how
think-
would we know?
Well, that's why you want her to be there at the meeting,
Yeah, true,
cross-examine her.
true.
right, and also the Environment Committee did talk about a trial. In other words,
Yeah,
we'd
true.
see what happens. So it would be, we would have the opportunity to say no, thank you, if in fact it doesn't work out.
You had talked about a memorandum of understanding or some other kind of formal agreement between the town and the beekeeper to avoid misunderstandings that could range from what we were just talking about to who gets the honey, because it seems like she would like to have the honey as a business. Some people in town would like to get some of it for free. I think we need to make sure those questions are clearly spelled out ahead of time. And I think you had suggested an MOU or something, Steve.
Also, I mean, the thing is, if the purpose of this session is to decide whether to move forward, I would suggest that if you decide to move forward, that you request the town attorney to draft an MOU with the person. So that would be on the agenda, not to form it afterward.
I think
Because
before we even ask him to draft an MOU, though, we need to find out what he thinks about our exposure to liability. I would like to hear actually specifically from Ron on that issue, because this is what we went into years ago with the sledding hill, is what is the town's exposure and do we have a good understanding of that? And frankly, I'm not sure if we really ever got our hands around that. But I think before we start something, introduce something new, even if it is a trial basis on temporary basis, we all have to be informed. That's due diligence on what exposure the town would have. And that would, definitely be coming from Ron. And then I hope we would listen to it, whatever it is.
Right.
You
This
talked
is-
to
this is-
Legit, didn't you,
What?
Matt? Did you talk to Legit?
That's what I was just gonna say, aren't sure.
Yeah, let's get that too.
I did talk to Legit, who's the local government insurance trust. They didn't give a very detailed response back. It was mostly you'd be required to put up some signage, and all persons that are participating should complete a liability form for the town.
Would that increase our insurance policy premiums?
Yes, basically the value of the bee boxes would be added to the town hall property contents.
Right, but
Um,
that's not my question. My question is, once you add something like a trampoline to your property,
Yeah.
does your home ownership insurance policy then become more expensive?
We definitely need to find that out. But the problem here for all of us is that this is a very sweet and noble idea.
Yeah,
And it's a shame that because of the way bees are, that you're under the gun to do it by April. And it's just a shame that this wasn't thought about months and months ago. So, I
don't
mean,
feel under the gun to do this by April at all. If this is something we want to do, then we need to learn about it and do it.
yeah, but it is under the gun because there's so many lingering questions about it that really the public needs to know so they can adequately there isn't a, I don't want to disparage the idea because I think it's lovely. I know a little bit about bees and all that, but it just seems that you're being pressured to make a decision without enough information and what the impact is going to be on residents. And I think that even though he wrote a beautiful article, it wasn't that comprehensive because we don't know enough about it. So that's my input into this.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very busy couple of months ahead of us, and it gives me pause to add something like this when there's so much. I mean, let's not forget that, Matt, you're going to be proposing a new website design, is that right? And that's coming before us. There's just seems there are many substantial decisions that the council will have in the next couple of months. And I wonder if this maybe should be something that could be put off till next year and researched over the course of the coming months.
I generally speaking, don't like to feel sort of an artificial time pressure because of the bees and the beekeeper on something like this when I have the sense that that we don't really know what we're getting into, and even if we limited it to a year, it might be difficult for us to unwind it somehow, or unpopular even to unwind it, which fine, but why? We all sort of like the idea of supporting bees, but the question about devoting town land to this and devoting town resources to monitoring it is an important one. I feel like it's a council level decision and not a committee level decision. And we're now at the point where it's being brought up to the council. And, if we want to slow it down, then that's okay. That's my view on it.
We're not even allowing the rental of the town hall or of the area around the town hall just yet. So to set aside some property for bees at this point, I'm just not sure on
Well,
hard time.
if we slow it down effectively, we delay it a year. And
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
if that's going to happen, all right, that happens.
Yeah.
Barbara, that one's a red herring, what you just said. The reason why we're not renting the town hall is because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the bee, as far as I know, bees don't get COVID. It's always possible, I suppose, but they're also in the open air. And so there would be no reason.
Yeah, but we want people to be able to use our park land safely, and especially if they can't be inside. And so, even though that's a very sort of remote corner of the town, and probably there aren't actually that many people there on any given day, we still have to take it as seriously as we would, any other part of the town parkland.
Well, we do certainly have to take it seriously as part of the parkland, whether there's a pandemic or not. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But that's the point.
Especially if it carries.
Pandemic is irrelevant to our consideration of it.
I agree with you on that. That's fine.
I do have a question in the write-up. It says we only use the property that I guess we're not considering for an Easter egg hunt. I didn't know we had an Easter egg hunt. Am I missing something?
What he meant was the egg toss.
No, but we're not talking about that part of the property, are we? I thought we.
Yes. Well, that was the original proposal.
I didn't know. So it's the egg toss.
The 4th of July egg toss. No, but I think that is a county that has a county park, and we can't. I don't know. I wouldn't think we could add bees to something like that.
That's not a county park.
I thought it was. What is it? There's some difference in designation between the land between the yard next to the town hall and Wisconsin Avenue. There's some difference to it. I might be using the wrong term.
I think that the land was bought with public open space money.
Right.
Okay.
But it's still our property.
It's our land. I said that from the beginning, but there is a different designation for it.
I
In
don't
terms
think
of what we can do with it. Yeah. We've talked about it before. What we can do with that land is different.
Steve, how strongly you're the liaison, correct, to the Environment Committee? How strongly do you think they would be receptive to waiting a year? What are your thoughts on that?
I think they'd be receptive. I'm not sure if there is a particular time constraint on this specific opportunity.
Mhm.
You know, maybe the beekeeper, if the beekeeper can't move the hive to Somerset, they'll move the hive someplace else. I just don't know.
Right.
My guess is that Barton would be very disappointed, but I'm wondering whether, following up on a suggestion Barbara had made earlier, whether Barton could identify anyone in town who'd be willing to take some, maybe not as many hives as were being discussed, but maybe a couple of hives.
But Ron has to check the zoning. That's what he was saying.
There are no rules against bees, having bees in any municipality in the state, is my
But I thought
understanding.
he just said that there were some restrictions that he ran into himself.
Yeah.
But you live in Frederick, right?
Right. So in Montgomery County, as I understand it, but I need to check, at least in 2014, when I last looked at the issue, it was deemed a farming use, which is allowed as a limited use in all zones. But I think there are some requirements, and if not by Montgomery County, then by, well, I need to look into it. I know you have to register a bee colony under Maryland law, and I don't recall if Maryland law imposes any other requirements.
When I looked at something for Montgomery County, it said that no municipality had put in place any restrictions
Mhm.
against having bees, but
Right,
I'm
right, but
I'm
yeah,
not a lawyer.
and county law addresses whether it's permissible as a matter of zoning.
And we could do something different, but
I have to say that I do not like the idea of asking some private resident to have the bees. What if two residents want them, for example, to say the least. But it's meant to be the town, and it's meant to be a statement by the town that we're doing something about bees this way by working with a beekeeper to have beehives in the town. And that's, I think, the idea we should be voting on that was recommended by the Environment Committee.
well, what I think, Robin, I'm sensing from the group is not to put this on the April agenda at all, because there are enough concerns about enough concerns and questions that people don't want to deal with it this year.
I understand that there are some concerns raised that way, and that's fine. But what I'm trying to say is that I think the direction we should be going in is, does the town want to have beehives on its property, rather than trying to pass it on to a private resident, which leads to further complications.
As of today, I would say we have a lot of questions to have answered before we even get to, yes, we do want to have bees on town land.
I agree.
Do you agree with that, Robin?
I've heard several. I'd like to see them, if somebody's collecting them, to have a look at them so that they can be shared with the Environment Committee.
Yeah. Well, I think also some of them have to be answered by Ron, not just the Environmental Committee.
Well, I know, but I think the Environment Committee should see them.
Ah, okay.
So who is going to take the responsibility to do that?
Can't they just watch our work session?
I think one
That's
member of it is on the work session.
I mean, that would be the simplest way, just to tell them the minutes for our conversation here. Right? It captures whatever.
Yeah, right.
I'm saying.
Yes, I did.
Is there anything else anybody wants to say on this topic? Okay.
I just like to echo Robin's comments, about the town. I think this fits nicely with the town's move to ban the use of certain pesticides on the lawns. We're looking for a healthy lawn. Part of a healthy environment is bees. Bees are in crisis mode throughout the United States. To the extent that we can make a statement and in a practical way support the bees, I think it is something that the town should do. I recognize these are some very valid questions folks are asking.
Yeah.
And I'll work with the EC to see what we can do to answer them. And the timeline just might not support
I
the
also
near-term
think the
decision.
fact is that that land between Wisconsin Avenue and behind the pool, I think it, you know, it is possible that we could put a fence up there along the Wisconsin Avenue edge if we wanted to, right? Where the new trees are, all of the WSSC trees, we could put a fence up there and really, you know, limit, I mean, I don't know, people might have objections to that idea too. I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons, but if we were worried about people sort of wandering onto the town parkland and stumbling across our beehive and either wrecking it or getting stung or both, you know.
We
Maybe
have to
we-
put up a fence. We
Yeah,
have to,
maybe
that's
we-
part of the plan.
Maybe we could also fence off access to the area in some way to make it a little bit more limited to town of Somerset residents, and so therefore cut down the number of people who might try to sue us, you know, like, and then maybe there's more buy-in if it's really like people in the town like it and they want it to be there and they're aware it's there because they read our newsletter and so on and so on. I like that
Mhm.
plot of land idea a lot better than the one over by the town hall. That was a non-starter for me.
And you know, bees rarely sting, in fact. Wasps are
Well,
villains,
I-
bees are not.
Seen-
Who knows? But anyway,
But Steve, could you explain, because the, what's in our packet is not where it's going to be. Could you tell me where it's going to be? I'm not sure I quite understand the new proposal.
So I did not go with Barton to look at the site. I really can't describe it. I just understand it's the area where trees were cleared out for some of that recent WSSC work.
uh-huh.
Is it close to, you know, how people cut across to walk to the metro?
Oh, Barbara, it's behind, it's across the stream from where Matt Fink lives.
So it's way behind Matt Fink.
Yes, it's on the other side of the stream and it's very open. Some people walk from Wisconsin Avenue through, but you have to cross a stream, I think, to
Yeah.
get back.
There's gonna be a lot of people.
But it's a pretty open area. It has just as was being discussed, some small trees that WSSC planted. Eventually they'd be too big and make the area too shady. It was actually Patty Friedman's idea, and she took Barton to take a look at that site.
But it's not close to Matt. I mean, Matt Fink would not be affected by it. It's not close to him.
Well, actually, I think I heard Patty say that she thought that was the one house that was anywhere near and that one would want to talk with Matt just to alert him if you were going to put it there. But it's not like super close, but it's
Right.
you
So
could see the area.
someone from the Environment Committee would also want to get Matt to buy in, it sounds like, just as a courtesy.
Any other comments? So my understanding is that the Environment Committee will get some feedback from Jack, who's on the line, and from watching this and the questions that were raised about putting apiaries on town land. And Steve was going to work with them, and Ron is going to review some of the legal issues. Is that right? Ron, you're muted.
I can look further into whether you would have any increased liability. You're looking at the county code. Yeah, as said before, beekeeping is deemed farming, and farming is permissible in the R60 zone. There are no specific requirements imposed for beekeeping. Under state law, you do have to register the colony and you have to report certain things.
Mhm.
That's what the beekeeper does, I'm sure.
Right, yeah, and if someone else is, if another beekeeper is maintaining the hive on someone else's property, that has to be disclosed with signage. And so the town could set up an MOU with the beekeeper to shift liability and require the beekeeper to have insurance to indemnify the town in the event the town is sued as a result of the beekeeper's actions. Because it is allowed as zoning, because it is allowed as a matter of zoning, it wouldn't be, well, it would be difficult, I think, for a plaintiff to prove that the town's negligent in allowing the use to occur.
Yeah,
Someone may argue, well, a park, there's an expectation that it's used for park activities and not
Right.
beekeeping, and that someone's
We would
not
have to-
expecting to be stung if they're there. But bees are natural things, and I think it would be difficult to prove that
Yeah.
the town was negligent if you've maintained appropriate fencing, signage, and warnings and
Yeah.
whatnot.
One of the things I think that's nice about the beekeeping proposal is that's part of the original Somerset history. The beekeeper, I think it was on Lower Dorset. There was a big, it's in our town history book, but beekeeping was part of the early town.
Yeah, I think the USDA bee colony was kept in Somerset originally. actually.
Yes, that's what it was. That's right. And then it got moved out to Beltsville or somewhere else.
That's cool.
That's the cause of the great bee crisis, because they moved our bee colony to Beltsville. That explains it.
It's our fault.
Mhm.
Is there anything else
there-
anybody would like to volunteer or say about this topic?
I'll just add one thing very quickly is that not necessarily specific to an apiary, but generally there is a similar to Tree City USA, there is a designation from the Xerxes Society called Bee City USA for municipalities to put in place practices and things of that nature that help cultivate healthy bee colonies. So
Bees and bees, that's Somerset. There we go.
I wonder if the Environment Committee wants to reach out to some of those communities and just get some thoughts and suggestions and how it goes for them. Is it worthwhile? I think that might be some good feedback too.
I'll send Barton the link to that so he can look and see how this might fit in, or that might fit into this.
Mhm.
Then I think we're ready to move on to the next topic, which is the PEPCO hearing on its new multi-year proposal that's in front of the Public Service Commission. Tammy had hoped that Somerset would testify, and Jeffrey has offered to testify in mid-April. And the idea is that you all would review the testimony and either at the April meeting, either say yay or nay. Robin and I work together, and you have a draft proposal. So Robin, did you want to say something about that?
Well, the basic message is that we are very strongly in favor of the LED proposal that PEPCO has put before the Public Service Commission. And the only point we raise is that because the costs that they are using to base their tariff on are actually estimated, that we need an independent cost estimate so that both PEPCO and us are assured that the costs are true costs. But we are, with that, we are still very strongly in favor of it, and that's what the message is.
Jeffrey, did you want to say something, since it's going to be your statement? I don't know what you think about it.
No, I'm fine with it. Thanks for all your work.
Anybody, any reactions or reflections, concerns? If not, then this will go on the April agenda. Okay. The next item is an old favorite, dealing with the code. And I think Franny has sort of championed trying to get this part of the code simplified and clearer. So let me turn this over to Franny and Ron, who've been working on this
Yep.
for years.
Well, this is a very specific item. And I guess, we haven't got a specific code change to put in front of you because I wanted to talk today more about the idea rather than going down the road of drafting language, because I don't think there's much point in drafting language if we don't sort of agree on a different policy direction. But one idea that I had is that I thought that it would make sense for us to lighten up on the regulation of replacement HVAC units that were in the same location as existing ones. And so my idea would be to sort of look at those as a category of sort of non-problematic replacements, provided that they pass a noise test. And to try to manage those in terms of council, in terms of how they're managed through the town office in one way, and then to separate out into a different treatment would be HVAC units that are part of an open building permit or HVAC units that are proposed to go into a different location, and that those would have sort of a higher level of scrutiny. You know, and basically that the council will be checking to make sure there would only be a higher level of scrutiny in the sense that the council will be checking to make sure that they still pass the noise test. All of these would need to be, I think, treated sort of the way we treat fences and walls, where you put a deposit down for the work and then you don't get your deposit back until after the work is completed. In this case, it would be after the noise test proof is provided. So it's just really a discussion item. I don't want to wear anybody down on this topic. It's something that I think makes sense because from my point of view, HVAC units either pass a noise test or they don't. And I don't think that that should be something that the council has any kind of subjective review over. That's my philosophy. I recognize that people have been that council members have been weighing in on HVAC units for a long time, and the idea of giving up some regulatory control might be uncomfortable for people. So I'm bringing it up to talk about it and see whether anybody feels like that would be something that we could take off of the plate of the council members. It would still need to be managed by the town hall. So
I
I
have
don't
a
know.
question for Matt. Having two standards, Matt, how does that work for the town office?
Well, it essentially would be the same as like a driveway apron right now is the exact same. In fact, if you're doing repairs, the mayor has authority and can delegate authority to the town manager to issue a permit for those repairs. But if a driveway, for instance, is changing in the shape or location or size, then it does have to go before the council. So I think that it would be fine. They would submit a site plan indicating where it is, where the old one was, if there was one, and then it would go from there.
My only comment is make it HVACs and heat pumps because they basically both of them are relevant.
I don't really know what a heat pump is, but
It's an HVAC with a switch that goes the other way so that you can get warm air going in or warm air going out.
I see, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think basically whatever we are checking, whatever we group under that category right now is what I would include in the code language. So if it's included in the code language as something that we regulate, then I would just pick up that entire definition and move it, you know, adjust that whole category. So that would be swept in. So anything that we're measuring for sound would be treated this way, that they would, you know, they would say, I want to put in a new HVAC unit, and you still have to come into the town hall. You'd have to fill out the checklist. You'd have to mark down whether or not it was going to be in the same location. And if you did not have an open building permit, then that would go to the mayor and the town manager. And you would have to put a deposit down, which you would get back after you provided your proof that your unit was past the noise test. And that would be most of the HVAC units. And then the ones that are part of an open building permit, we already treat differently. and the ones that go into a different location, it would just reduce the number of applications that come in front of the council, right? Because in the rare situation where somebody says, I need a new HVAC unit, but I'm going to take the opportunity to redo all of my duct work and move it to a different spot, you know, then we would, you know, maybe that could come to the council, but it would still be a question of passing the noise test. We still would not be regulating the location, assuming that all of the setback rules for Montgomery County were met. Anyway, I don't know if Ron and I have exchanged emails on this, and maybe he has something more coherent to say on it at this time.
No, not really. I mean, I've spoken about this issue before, and I think you've all heard my thoughts. And the initial reason for going through this review was to try and streamline some things, because some residents maybe a year ago asked, is this public hearing really necessary for me to replace in kind in the same location a HVAC unit
Yeah.
that is gone kaput?
Right. So anyway, I think it would also be good for our residents. It wouldn't limit them to the timetable of the council meetings. And, you know, I know that we do have a procedure in place where, you know, people are allowed to replace things on an emergency basis. But, you know, if it's not an emergency, you know, why should you have to wait to get on the council calendar if all you're doing is basically swapping out one piece of equipment for the other, putting a deposit down, providing proof of your noise test?
I agree with that entirely. And as long as our code, our charter allows it to be entirely done by executive action, then we're good. And as we already have, driveways are done by executive action.
We have other things too, like walls and fences.
Yeah, so it would require a code amendment, because
Yeah.
currently right now, you know, the mayor can grant an emergency permit, but then the applicant has to come in for a permanent.
Okay, well,
Permit.
then amending
And
the
of
code.
course, you know, of course, as I always say, like the risk, I mean, we're all reasonable people here, but the risk is that you have a council full of people who have, you know, some kind of bad, mean-spirited, you know, inclined to say no or something, or maybe a neighbor says, you know, I've just never liked listening to that noise, even if it is quiet enough under the noise test. So that I just think you run the risk of people essentially having a vote where they get voted down on their ability to replace their HVAC unit. So anyway, I think that's why I'm bringing it up in the work session. But like I said, Ron, neither one of us has drafted the new language at this point. So we're just here to talk about it and answer questions. I don't know if Steve had any questions on it.
I appreciate taking the initiative. I think it's something that's absolutely worth considering.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just have to, it's important for the council to still, I guess, to protect the rights of residents in the town to know what's happening and have input. But I think there might be a way that we can do that and streamline the process a bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So keeping in mind public notice and, you know, what basically, you know, like sort of Matt was saying, whatever we do for the driveway apron, maybe we could start with that as a model and talk about how it would work in practice.
And I can give you an example. In the town of Chevy Chase, there are variances and then there are administrative variances.
Mm-hmm.
For administrative variances, things that are deemed minor, they're approved administratively unless a council member or a neighbor objects, and then it goes to a public hearing.
So, Mr. Town Attorney,
That might be good.
Mr. Town Attorney, would it be possible to write the change so that the applicant is required to notify neighbors so that they would be able to appeal to me if they had a concern? Because that is what I am, that's my input into this. The reason why that law was created was so that neighbors would have the opportunity to comment and participate. So
Absolutely.
if you write it so that the applicant is still required to notify their neighbors so they could have input to the, basically this is an administrative decision decided by the town manager. And so, but to have the loss of the notice, that's one of the great things about the
Right,
way our code is written.
right.
Is that, and you've been talking about all this notice to Matt Fink and everybody else.
Yeah.
Losing that would be not a
don't
good thing.
think
That would
we
be a
would not-
step backward.
For sure. And I don't think I think,
And I also
given the
think-
fact that our code, we worked really hard to make sure that we had consistency in the code in terms of the notice provisions for all of the different kinds of permits that we have. And so I don't see why this would be any difference. This would still be a permit. This would not be,
But
it would need to be treated the same way with an
it's taking-
application
it's-
and a notice.
Oftentimes.
Again, not a consent, right? Because a lot of
I-
times people get
I
that wrong.
understand.
Yeah,
but
I know you do.
Oftentimes, council members have input into decisions that are very important, and this will take that out. This will give a lot more power to the mayor and the manager, which I think is not necessary.
But
that's
again, if
up to you.
an HVAC unit is put in the same location and passes the noise test, what input should we be allowed to give?
Well,
I guess is my question.
Well, that when you change the law, it will go out to the public to comment, and let's see what they have to say about that.
Right.
I don't think most people will like the loss of that input and for the council to make the decision, but that's the beauty of the
Right,
legislative
but
process.
if people still have the opportunity because they've been notified, if people still have an opportunity to comment, then that's not being lost. But what changes are the decision makers. And what I'm saying is, if we're talking about a unit that's being replaced in the same location and it has to pass the noise test, that's no different than our level of review right now.
Except it gives the power to the mayor and the manager, not the council. And I disagree.
And I believe it should be.
I disagree, but it's up to you. It's up to you, but I disagree with that.
So you think it was okay for a possibility where a council would
I think
overturn
the way,
something like that?
I think it's functioning beautifully now, and I see no reason to change it. But it's up to you. That's the beauty of the democratic process, of the legislative process.
Well, again, I started out by saying I didn't want to wear anybody down with this, and I think I agree that it is working. My objection to it is that I don't think that things should be going to the council. That should essentially be sort of A or B issues. Either they pass or they don't. And again, we're talking about units that are being placed in the same location. So that's my position on it, but I'm not going to direct Ron to draft an ordinance unless, other people think it's
Right, I
worth.
mean, I agree with Franny on this one, Jeffrey. I mean, it is, to me, a trivial decision as well expressed by the resident. My air conditioner died, I have to replace it. Why do I have to go through a hearing to replace it? And that's the point. If you were at the level of replacing an air conditioner or heat pump in exactly the same location, and it's one that still satisfies the noise test. I mean, it's trivial.
I don't agree. I don't think it's trivial, and I think that having the public, giving the public an opportunity to weigh in on that decision that is decided by the council is a better way of doing it. And it's not a problem now. So I see no reason to change it, but it's up to you. It's up to you.
I don't know. I can say will be my own personal experience, which is something I would not do, but somebody else might. The house next door to me is for sale. There's an offer on it. And we have our, air conditioners we both have our air conditioners on the same side of that house. So the units face one another, right? And I wouldn't do this, but I could see where someone might come in, not me, but and say, that air conditioner, that is, I just don't like where that air conditioner is. And I think you should move it. And I could see them putting a lot of pressure on the council. And that would really make me worried agree, so I actually am on board with Franny. I think some things, I mean, whoever buys that house, they're hopefully not going to tear it down. The air conditioner is going to stay there. It's going to be noisy, even though it likely meets all the requirements. It's just, it is what it is. And opening that up at this point, I think it could turn out to be really unneighborly. So I'm on board with the change.
Wait, and so I'm hearing that 3 council members think that this would be worth drafting.
I do.
Yeah, I heard Robin said that,
Mhm.
Franny, Barbara. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to see what the draft would be, because then I think we'll have a better sense of what the impacts would be. Because I think it is important, as the mayor has said, to protect the rights and the communications, the openness with the town, with residents.
And I agree with that, Steve. I think that's really, really important as well.
So what I'm hearing, I think, is a request to our town attorney to draft some language that would be introduced at the April meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I know, Jeffrey, you're not agreeing, but I'm
Well,
talking about.
It's not up to me. It's not up to me.
Okay, if we go forward that path, I would take on the job of writing an article for the journal if that would be helpful.
We definitely would need an article for the journal, and I'm not sure whether it should be for the, we don't usually discuss things that are introduced. We usually just introduce them and then discuss
Yeah,
them
I would
at
want to
the,
wait until we've introduced the actual bill to publish an article.
so then you would write it for the May meeting, correct?
Okay,
I
for
think
for the April 15th, wait, for the beginning of.
for the April, would be for the April 15th due date, yeah.
Okay,
Well, remember,
that's what-
per our new process, today you decide whether you want to draft it. Then you vote to enter, you vote to introduce it in April.
Right.
So there's still another opportunity for a decision.
It would not
Today,
be.
all you would decide, you would decide to ask the town attorney to draft it.
But it would be introduced at the April meeting, but not considered until the May meeting. Are we all on the same page with that? Okay.
I am.
Okay, Ron, you're okay? All right, so we're down to what turns out to be one more item, and we had quite a lively discussion about these items, the Paris Climate Agreement and the Declaration of Climate Emergency, actually over several days and at last night's meeting. And Steve, do you want to kind of present where the committee's at on this?
Yes, thank you. So I'm kind of excited by this, and obviously Barton really is. He's the driving force. But we're kind of separating the initial idea that the Environment Committee had. The initial idea was to sign the Paris Climate Agreement, instead of sort of taking a 2-step process, the recommendation from the Environment Committee, with the first step is the declaration of a climate emergency. This would be a formal recognition by the town council that that climate change is real and it's a threat. But the only actions that come out of this is that the council would be directing the Environment Committee to have a town forum, to engage with residents, let the community know that we have declared there's a climate emergency, and make some assessments that are necessary for us to understand what are the implications of agreeing with the Paris Climate Agreement. We don't really sign on to the Paris Climate Agreement. We're not a nation. What happens, the mayor would sign a declaration of support and an agreement to follow the values and direction of the Paris Climate Agreement. More than 100 mayors of cities across the US have signed such statements. But, like part of that is that the town would reduce its carbon footprint. And it seemed to me that before we agree to reduce our carbon footprint, we sort of need to know what is our current carbon footprint and what are the potential implications. How would we potentially go about reducing our carbon footprint? So anyhow, that's what we're doing. I'm really excited to get started on this. It'll be an ongoing, evolving process. And I think it's great. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I just want to go back to what you said about directing the town council directing the town to have a town forum. Can you go into a little more detail on that, what that would look like or mean?
Oh, the way I drafted the working with the Environment Committee, we drafted this declaration of a climate emergency. The council would be directing the Environment Committee to communicate with residents through various mediums, the town journal, and with a town forum.
Mhm.
Similar to the way, like, we put in the charter for the Stormwater Management
Right.
Committee.
Right. So I think the idea, I want to ask this question in this spirit of getting to yes. So let me frame it that way. And that is just that when we were talking about sort of like the general rules for committees and kind of how we would look at them going forward, one of the things that we came up with was kind of trying to ask them to prepare not just only a budget, but also an agenda for the coming year, right? And I think, like, not to pick on this one committee, but they've got a lot of initiatives going on, a lot of resources being drawn upon, whether it's town money or town time. And then there's also volunteer time, which is also super valuable. But sort of how does that fit into what all the other things that the environmental committee is trying to do? And essentially, have you talked about having a budget for this project? If it's not just a question of signing on to a letter, what is the scope of the project and how does the committee see it mapping out over the year, and how much essentially do you intend to spend or hope that the town will allocate in the budget for something like this going forward?
Well, that's a great question. And that's the whole purpose of separating the two. So
Yeah.
declaration of climate emergency has no costs to the town, except maybe we have a Zoom license. We're using part of that Zoom license to hold a town forum.
For sure, yeah.
But we're also in this declaration asking the Environment Committee or directing the Environment Committee to develop some of those cost estimates.
Okay.
And there are a number of carbon offsets. Maybe the town should pay for carbon offsets for the electricity that the town offices use. That's just an example I know the Environment Committee has discussed. But I think that we, the council, would like to see a list of a big picture or vision of what might be entailed with agreeing to support the vision of the Paris Climate Agreement.
So are you then going to be like essentially trying to focus on changing behaviors of residents, or are you trying to sort of build a framework where the town itself changes its behavior? In other words, like maybe the next truck we buy is a certain kind because you put in the research and there's a recommendation, or maybe we look into solar panels for the garage roof. Like, are these intended to be behaviors by the town government, or are these intended to be sort of like educating town residents in how they can behave differently, and or both? I mean, but I guess also, just because I frequently ask questions about some of the climate stuff, I don't want it to be seen that I don't believe in it as a threat. It's just that I'm asking questions about the role of a small town government here and trying to understand how far we can go before we're stretched too thin, whether it's financially or in terms of manpower. So that's why I'm asking the questions. It's not that I don't believe in climate change as being a problem. I'm trying to understand what exactly is the Environmental Committee asking for here? Is it asking for the town to change its behavior or for all of the residents to be somehow educated? And I guess I would debate whether or not we really truly need to do that, but anyway,
Right.
I'd
Good
like to do
questions.
something at some point.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, go for it, Robin.
Yeah, all right. I mean, declaring climate emergency for the town should be meaningful. Otherwise, we shouldn't get involved with it. And I do absolutely believe that municipalities at our level can do things to actually help control global warming. But it's also not all on the Environment Committee is what I'm trying to say. It's on council too. And one of the things that we can do is actually pass a motion similar to what was done on diversity by the county council, which is we could say that we're going to consider every action we're going to take in terms of its environmental implications, global warming implications. I mean, if you think of this evening, electric chargers, yeah, that would be a good help. Opening the pool for no, that's a bad thing actually for the environment if you think of it in those terms. And so you can go through each of them and evaluate them in environment terms if we want to do that. So there are things municipalities can do to help.
Absolutely.
Mhm. I'm trying
Absolutely,
to
Robin. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
But sorry, getting back to your question, Franny, or at least the way I captured it. I think the answer is sort of yes, both. The Environment Committee, my understanding of what the Environment Committee wants to do is to focus on what the town can do to change town practices, or at least mitigate town practices. And that's where things like credits or planting trees might be things that the town could do. So there could be some costs and impacts to the town doing that. And that's why
Right.
the committee would need to do some studying and prepare some information for us before we would go to the next step of the Paris Climate Agreement. But I think it's also about educating residents. And I don't mean that in terms of getting people to believe that there's an issue with climate change. I think that's probably, I hope that's well understood by most, if not all, of the residents, but people might not understand what they can do themselves to mitigate climate change. And some of that would be education and outreach. And these are just sort of my speculations. This is what we would be asking the Environment Committee to explore after we declare a climate emergency. But yes, we maybe educate people about the ability to sign on to renewable energy utility opportunities, or maybe the importance of going to electric vehicles or better mileage per gallon vehicles with their next vehicle purchase. Just some education about what are the things that people can do.
So Steve, do you remember when we were talking about all the committee stuff and we were talking specifically about like people kind of drawing on Matt's time and Linda's time and kind of like, sort of assigning work to them kind of outside of maybe outside of the knowledge of the council or Jeffrey. Like, I think I want to just raise it in this context because I feel like this is a pretty big apple to bite into, and could be like an ongoing job for somebody who worked for the town of Somerset. And I'm not suggesting we have the resources to hire another person, but I wouldn't want anybody in the environmental committee to sort of assume that they can just assign this work to Matt.
I talked to Barton, and I think this is something that since they're asking me also to sign on individually, I think I would be working on it. I don't think that any of the staff would be involved in it.
Well, I mean, I'm
I
glad
sign
to
on
hear
to
that.
all these. There's
Yeah.
a lot of these kind of things that I sign on to that have nothing to do
Yeah,
with,
but I think that's true for signing on to a declaration, but if we're talking about an ongoing education program, that does, I think,
I
lead
think
into
that-
work for Matt, and I'm just like,
it's more like just showing the support, the way you pass a resolution of support. And then we can infiltrate all this in the planning as we make changes. But I don't, there's no program that gets approved by anybody. It's just showing our support for these goals. And then,
Right.
and that's all it is. It's not a program that we submit and then we have, and then there's any staff time at all.
But that's not exactly what Steve said, and that's kind of why I'm trying to parse it
Well,
out. And if I'm wrong, if I understand.
Maybe he didn't say, maybe he didn't know. I talked to Barton extensively about this because I knew that you would all be concerned about that. And I don't, and maybe Steve can comment on what I'm saying, but
Yeah,
I don't think it'll have any impact on the staff.
I think it would be next to zero impact. It would be like, if there's a town forum, they'll ask Matt to put out a town notice as part of his weekly notice. That might take him, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
That's not really.
They might ask him what's for some information on the utility bill or a contact for somebody at Pepco so they can find out about our utility use in the town. But then the Environment Committee would do the outreach. The Environment Committee is a very active group with very active volunteers.
I know.
So that they're not planning to rely on or impose upon the town staff.
Okay, I wanted to raise it in this context before we get too far down the road. I think it's something we have to keep an eye on going forward, especially with Matt focusing so hard on, basically keeping us under budget. We have a lot to keep an eye on that we haven't had to focus as closely on in the past. So
My response to that is that there will be no time spent by the staff.
okay, you heard it here. That's not my only, I think there are other things to ask about. I just wanted to start with that. I hope other people have other questions.
Well, the most recent thing that I've seen is a very short declaration of climate emergency. Is that correct?
That's it. That's all we're talking about for the first step. And then the council will be involved in whether or not there are any further steps.
This
Steve,
is for the council to recognize that there is a climate emergency.
Right.
That doesn't require any staff or anything.
So Steve,
Like
you would not,
recognizing that Joe Biden, it's like recognizing that Joe Biden is president.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is a climate emergency. This is not
I
hard to
wasn't
see.
even asking that question. I was asking the other question, which is not about the declaration. I was specifically asking about the second part of what Steve talked about. So I understand what a declaration is and how little, effort that's going to take in relation to other things. That's not what I was asking about. I think
So
Steve
Steve-
understood what I was asking about. So I'm not concerned. I know he heard me.
so Steve, you don't think there'll be at the April meeting, a proposal beyond the declaration of climate emergency?
It's just the declaration.
And Ron, you were okay? You saw the wording. It was a very short resolution.
Yes.
Okay. So we can actually, it doesn't have to be introduced at the meeting, right? If it's a resolution, it can just be on the agenda. We have a choice.
That's correct.
And since there's been a draft already prepared, did anybody have comments on the draft? Okay. Well, if not, let me just try to do a little summary of what things I think we agreed on for the council meeting. We're gonna have Camp Somerset on the agenda. Matt, so this is, you're keeping tabs of this?
Yeah.
And also the Pepco charging station, but we want to have both Tammy and Barton do articles. We'll have to coordinate, and Tammy at the meeting. And then we're gonna have the Pepco hearing on the state testimony statement. And I can do a short article on that. We are going to have an introduction of wording for the HVAC code change, but not an article until the next journal. And we are going to put the declaration of climate emergency on the April agenda. Was there anything else?
Well, we deferred action on the apiary, so I don't know if you want to tell people about that.
Well,
I've already reached out to Barton while we've
Already,
been
okay.
talking.
Okay.
I mean, I'm figuring that on items that we are deferring at the moment.
Yeah. But that one had a timetable, so.
Yeah,
And the pool committee, we're also deferring action on that one at the moment.
no, I think we have to, I think we have to put the early opening of the pool on the April agenda.
Yeah, right.
Because
Too late.
unless we do, it will be too late. But we needed a lot of information on before we can do that, but it is going to be on the agenda.
But also, if you don't get that information for some reason in time for the meeting, and you do get it soon thereafter, there could be a brief special meeting.
Well, which brings me to, we usually at this meeting schedule our next work session.
Okay.
And we've tended to do special council meetings ahead of the work session. I'm looking at the week of April 12th. Usually we prefer to do it before the journal deadline. So in case things come out of this meeting that would generate journal articles, people have enough time to write them.
Okay.
And
So right now, either I haven't completed my calendar or I don't have any meetings on my schedule that week. So I'm open to discussion. I know some people have longstanding.
I have a conflict on Monday. I have a conflict on Monday night.
Okay. How are people for Tuesday, the 13th from 5 to 7?
I'm okay then.
Sounds good.
Is that good for everybody?
yeah, I stepped away when you all were finishing up the discussion on the personnel manual. That's not on the April agenda. Where was that left? Just because
Jeffrey wanted to have us take it up at this work session. So it would be on the April 13th work session agenda.
great, thank you.
And then it would, potentially it could be on the May council agenda.
And what time on the 13th?
5 to 7, does that work for you, Ron?
It does, yes.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank everybody. I think we got through a lot of material and things that were not easy necessarily to deal with. So I really appreciate people's focus and contributions, and just to thank you.
You're here.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Sure. Have a
Bye.
good evening, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.